Thanks so much, Hannah. I just shared my screen. Are you able to see it okay?
Mm,
Not
No,
yet.
not yet.
There we go.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, great. I'm dealing with a little bit of connectivity issues today, so we'll just go with the flow and see what happens. All right, everyone. So thrilled to be here with you today. Already, just the brief introductions in the chat are really exciting. Our main goal for today is to make everyone feel really ready to dive into the application. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different facets that allow us to do that. We have a lot to do in a short amount of time. It's going to feel like 5 minutes. I can't wait, especially to learn about what you all are up to and the incredible work that you're doing in Baltimore City. So we're going to start with an overview of the two grant programs that are being funded in this cycle, in which the technical assistance is going to be focused on. We'll also include a bit about eligibility. How do we know that we're eligible to move forward in the application process? What do we need to be thinking about there? We'll spend some time in the sections of the application. We won't be taking a deep dive into every single question, but we'll look at those sections. We'll talk about how to approach them. And we'll also look at how they're scored, what the scoring process is, and kind of reflect that back as a tool. And we'll also look at the timeline. In terms of the timeline, the biggest takeaway for today is let's get started now. We don't have to wait for the application to be live online. There are materials and resources ready to support you as we start to begin to work on those applications. And so we'll also spend a bit of time today looking at those avenues of support. You are not alone in this process, and there's a lot of folks who are really excited about the work you're doing and want to support you in the application process. And we'll also end with a brief reflection and next steps so that we're kind of like taking the energy and the momentum from today and spinning it into where we're headed from here. So we'll continue that energy forward. All right. We're going to jump into our overview portion. So I'll give some brief background on the two funds, the two programs that are funded through this grant cycle coming up. So the first is the Grassroots Fund. The second is the Community Accountable Fund, which we'll look at on the next slide. But they're both similar in terms of the application process. The application questions themselves are the same. The difference is that the Community Accountable Fund, which we'll look at in just a moment, requires a nomination, and then the amount of grants and the amount of funding for those grants is a little bit different. But in general, they're both lumped together for the purpose of today's application information session because they're not too far away from each other, especially when it comes to the work of actually completing the application. So to take a bit of a detailed dive here into the Grassroots Fund, it addresses traditional gaps in Baltimore's funding landscape by providing funding for grassroots, Baltimore-based youth-serving organizations to support an organization's overall mission. And the idea here also is based on those gaps that there's a focus on Black and Brown organizations. These grants for the Grassroots Fund, it's a multi-year grant for 5 years. So the grant itself, the award itself is $50,000 annually for 5 years. And it's really important. We heard so much about this at the Countdown to Launch webinar, which happened prior to today. We heard from previous folks who had received BCYF grants and had been a part of the application process. The main thing those folks were saying is that receiving a grant from BCYF is so much more than a grant. So it also really focuses on the process is embedded in this idea of capacity building of grantees. So it can position your organizations for success beyond BCYF funding. So we're taking a closer look at those skills. We're taking a closer look at those tools of what's needed in the application process, and then we're building upon it. The review process is the same for the Grassroots Fund and the Community Accountable Fund, where a panel of community grant reviewers select the grantees during this annual grant application process. And we'll dive a little more deeply into that a little bit later on today when we get to look at how that evaluation occurs and what we should be thinking about knowing that that evaluation is going to be on the way for our application. That being said, moving into the slight nuances now of the Community Accountable Fund. Also, as you all have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or interrupt at any time. You can use the hand raise feature, or you can stack in the chat, and I'll definitely, we'll be able to connect. We'll also have a portion dedicated to Q&A at the end today, so we can address questions then as well. So the Community Accountable Fund, again, the application questions are exactly the same. The eligibility in terms of budget is a bit different, and Dana Carr is going to dive into that in a couple of slides. But in general, the Community Accountable Fund is supporting youth-serving organizations that have a demonstrated commitment to being credible with and accountable to youth and the local communities that they're proposing to serve. The fund prioritizes programming that supports a specific population of youth that otherwise do not receive adequate support, and Black and Brown-led organizations. So this disbursement, again, is just a bit nuanced from the Grassroots Fund, where it's 3-year grants of $75,000 annually, and it's only to 3 eligible organizations, rather than the Grassroots Fund, where 12 eligible organizations will receive that funding. Again, the only other nuanced difference in terms of the disbursement and a little bit around the budget eligibility is that the Community Accountable Fund is also a nomination-based process. So in order to receive the application link, the organization has to be nominated by anyone, by any community member, any colleague or friend, it doesn't matter. And so then by completion of that nomination form, you would then receive a link to fill out the application. And we'll also dive into those specific timelines and share those links again today. All right. So moving on into our BCYF's investment priorities. This is going to be a really big thing to keep in mind, and we're going to start to dive into some discussion around this so we can really start to get those creative juices flowing right on this call. So BCYF has 5 investment priorities that are reflected in both of these grant programs. When we look at these in a bit more detail here on the next slide, we have an overview here in the center of what each of those priorities listed in the left-hand column looks like. So a bit of a description of what would if the priority is culturally sustaining, what does then that mean? And then what is the outcome? As a result of the programming, what's going to happen? Similarly, with priority 2 through 5, what is the priority that aligns with BCYF's investment? So the big piece here is that when you're completing your application, you can only choose one priority. And that is a huge challenge, right? Because so much of what's the priorities that are shared here organically overlap. And I'm sure in so many of your organizations are also organically overlapping. So we're actually going to take some time to start to weed through this a bit. So that way you feel prepared in this section as you start to think about how you're going to frame your application and how you're going to answer the questions within the application. So that being said, I'll pause here before we move into breakout rooms to start to think about these priority areas a little bit more deeply. Are there any questions so far on what we've covered before we start to take a deep dive into these priority areas?
Hi, good afternoon. I came in a little late. Are we going to self-select which group we want to go into, or we were asked to select? Or
we just have 2 groups, Nicole. We're just going to split folks in half. I wish it was, like a chatting group of 5, but we don't have enough facilitators for that today. So we're just going to split the groups in half for now.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? We're gonna break out. You'll either be with myself or with Dana Carr, and it's so fun that both of us are named Dana. And we'll guide you through the conversation and our brainstorming together. All right. If there's no immediate questions, Dana, anything else before we jump into some breakout conversations?
I don't think so.
Okay.
All right, I am opening up the rooms.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, what an amazing discussion. I'd love to just take 2 to 4-ish minutes to kind of open the floor about any takeaways that you had from your breakout session. What are you still thinking about? Did anything resonate? What are you reflecting on? Anything to share for the good of the group? Feel free to use the hand raise feature, and we can hear from folks that way. You can also place a takeaway in the chat. Nicole, jump in.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Great group. I mean, I guess my takeaway is that, as I looked at my enterprise, I realized it could fit in a number of categories. And so I'm gonna have to go back and work with, stakeholders, the board, and kind of do some soul searching, as you said, to kind of figure out which one it matches more, the most, which priority is the closest fit, and to make the case for that. So it's definitely some overlap in the different priorities, and I guess it's just a matter of making the case. So thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Anyone else? Questions that came up? Things you're still thinking about? Anything that resonated?
Yeah, my name is Warren Shaw. I'm from the Victory. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Warren.
Oh, okay. I'm from Victory and Q Adams Gardens. I'm one of the administrators, and we've been trying to run our program more as an educational program, and we work out of the Hilton Elementary School with the after-school program and carry it through the summer with the Youth Corps program, bringing kids in with that, and it goes into the fall where we have a weekend program. We're an environmental education program and urban agriculture. We're related to Baltimore Green Space. But what point I wanted to make is that we've been trying to create more of a class schedule of each day as we go along so that we know where we are, what we want to do each day, and we can list our goals and keep a list of, have we accomplished these goals and have the kids learned anything? And so listening to part of what we were talking about earlier, it was helpful to see that y'all are kind of like interested in knowing how we measure our goals and measure our successes. And so we're trying to develop that more, working with some of the teachers in the school in developing our class schedules and class assignments and all these things, and keeping a daily log of how we accomplish these goals.
Thanks, Warren. Yeah, I think any clarification of goals for anyone's organization here on the call is going to help with the alignment within a priority area. So if there's already work that's been done in terms of the creation or establishment of organizational goals, we're going to want to use that language to figure out what the alignment is, to figure out what the priority is. Great, thank you. All right. I'm looking at our time, so we're going to push on if that works for everyone and continue on through our session for today. So I'm going to pass it over to Dana Carr to chat a bit about eligibility. Dana, you're up.
Hi, everybody. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility. Hopefully everyone that's here is eligible, but there are a few ways that you can just kind of do a check and make sure that in fact you are eligible. So we're going to mention several resources the application workbook, the Rocket Resource Hub. Within all of those documents and resources, there is an eligibility quiz. And essentially, on the slide as well, there are these questions that each organization wants to go through just to make sure that they can affirmatively answer them. As Dana mentioned earlier, in terms of the grassroots and the community accountable fund, there's just really one nuance, which we'll cover in just a moment, which has to do with the budget. So regardless of what fund you are applying to, you must be Baltimore City based and serve young people ages 24 and under. If you are applying, you must either be a Maryland 501c3 organization or have a confirmed fiscal sponsorship. And so again, because we're starting all of this work prior to the deadline coming up in February, I just want to highlight that word confirmed, right? That you're not sort of scrambling at the last minute to try to get a fiscal sponsorship if you're not a 501c3, but you want to make sure that all of that stuff is lined up and ready to go. Again, the next bullet is really having to do with your organizational budget. So if your organizational budget is 350,000 or less, then you are eligible for the Grassroots Fund. And if your organizational budget lives somewhere between 350 and 500,000, then you would be eligible for the Community Accountable Fund. And just remembering that that one does require a nomination form. You must have been in existence, your organization, for at least a year. You must also have had at least 1 year of experience under your belt of running youth programs, and 51% of your employees must be Baltimore City residents. So those are sort of all of the checks that you want to make sure that you meet in terms of the eligibility requirements to be able to move forward with the application. All right, so we're going to move on to a timeline, right? And we've kind of mentioned these dates. I'm sure you've seen them if you were on the webinar last week. So for the Grassroots Fund, if you are going to be applying to that, that application will go live on January 8th. But as we have mentioned, Dana mentioned it, we talked about it in the breakout group. It's December and you can start now, right? There's so many resources and supports that are here for you to begin writing, for you to begin networking with other organizations. We talked about partnerships in our group, so collaborating with other organizations. All of that work can begin now, right? Today, if you haven't started already. That application will close on February 14th at 5 p.m. And so, of course, we are encouraging organizations not to wait until the last minute. Sometimes there can be, of course, technical issues with submitting applications. So really give yourself plenty of time so that you're not stressed out in terms of submitting that application. For the Community Accountable Fund, the nominations are open right now. And so those nomination forms will be open for the next couple of months and will close on February 7th. If you are nominated again by a colleague, a friend, a youth, maybe, you will be sent a link and you can apply, and that application will be available and open to you from January 8th. And again, same deadline of February 14th at 5 p.m. So I think I see a hand if we have a question before we move on about eligibility or the timeline.
I did have a question. If your budget teeters right around that 350,000 mark, can you apply to both funds? We're a
As-
little bit of a special circumstance, and I want to get into it because it wouldn't apply to anybody else because we're also a grant making organization. So I guess I'm just asking if the budget of, if our budget is around 350,000, could we apply to both funds?
Dana, did you want to go before I go?
No, you go.
I think we definitely, Julie, want to stick with one of those
Okay,
funds.
I got you.
Otherwise, we're kind of adjusting our financials to fit into two categories that say two different things.
Right, I
So
got you.
yeah, the best way to approach it is to look at your most recently completed fiscal year or calendar year,
It's just
and
different,
whatever,
it's just
yeah,
different
whatever
for
that.
us, 'cause
Yeah,
I
and
I wasn't able to hear you. That's I got that. That's I got that. It's just a little, we're grant making, so we go above 350 if we submit the budget with the grant pools, and we're
yes.
below 350 if we don't. So, and that's fine. I was told that's fine to submit the budget without the grant pools, but so we kind of are financially okay with both of them. But I got it. You want us to pick one? We'll pick one.
Yes, yes.
Pick one.
And we
That was a short
and
answer. Pick one. Okay.
yes, big one. And we can also connect, Dana or I can connect with you outside of today to look at numbers and start to work through that. We also have, and Dana's going to chat about this in a little while, an upcoming webinar specifically for budgeting and finance. So maybe looking at that recording or attending that webinar could also be helpful in answering the question, which one is the best one?
Right. We'll attend, but I mean, we will attend and we will pick one. I got it.
Great.
You had me at hello.
You too, Julie. You had us at hello too.
One other thing I want to mention before we go on in terms of timeline, because I know these questions come up as well, is when awardees will be notified, and that will begin in June of next year. So that is when awardees will be identified. And then also in terms of the grant, when does the grant begin? The terms, the services is September 1st, because I know that question has come up as well. And again, depending on what fund you're applying to, will be September 1st through August 31st of either the 3 or the 5 years. So that is, I think, all we have for timeline. So let's move on to application sections. So there are 5 sections that you are going to find in the application. Again, and we'll show you in just a couple of slides, we will be having some future webinars that are going to take a much deeper dive into some of these sections. But just again, for your awareness and so you can begin planning. There are 5 different sections. The first is going to be just kind of basic information, organizational information. So things like that total organizational budget is going to be found in that section. Any sort of demographic information, where your organization is located, the address, who the point of contact is, if you are a 501c3, if you are not, that you have a fiscal sponsor, who that fiscal sponsor is. So it'll cover that information. The second area is going to be the youth programming section. And so that is where we just kind of began talking about the priority area. That section or that question rather is found in that section. It'll ask you about your program's history. It'll definitely ask you about your vision and mission statements, your core values, and again, how you evaluate those outcomes, right? When you talk about your intended outcomes, what is the data, specifically the quantitative data that you have and that you collect on your program's participants, on the young people that you're serving. So that is that section. And again, that webinar will be held on Wednesday, January 8th. From 1 to 3. So definitely, if you want some more information, looking to explore that a little bit further, then definitely want to invite you to take advantage of that webinar. The third section is on programming outputs. So this is where we get into the type of programming, how often, I always kind of say the dosage, right? How many youth are you serving? How many programs do you have? What are the times of the program? What days of the week are you serving? What type of programming is it? We talked a little bit in the group of summer programming or after school. What's your method of delivery, right? Is it hybrid? Is it virtual? Is it in person? So all of those questions in terms of the output of your program are going to be found in that section. The next section is the scope of work. So that is really going to talk about the activities. And I'm so glad, pun intended, that Dana and I are aligned, because that was one of the words that came up. And then she said it again when we were back in our general group. In our breakout session, we talked about alignment. So this is where you really want to make sure that what you are sharing in terms of your program's activities are aligned back to that priority area, right, that you identified and that you chose. So this is where you'll really get into sort of the nuts and bolts of your program's activities, what the expected outcomes are. What is the evidence, right, that you have met the goals that you have identified? How are you planning to use the funds, right? That's really important for the grantor, right, to know how you are planning to spend the funds. What do you need the funds for? So that is where you'll talk a little bit about that, but really getting into what is the actual work that you do. And somebody just mentioned again a schedule, right? So really being very specific about the details of your program and the activities. And then last but not least is the budget template and narrative. And not say, but the webinar, we also do a scope of work and outcomes webinar that'll be held on January 30th. And then last but not least, like Dana just mentioned, there'll be a webinar for budget template and narrative, which is going to be held on January 23rd. So the budget template and narrative section, of course, is all about the numbers and the money and how it's going to be spent. And so again, we're going to get into some of the resources, but we do have an example budget that is located on the Rocket Resource Hub. There is also the budget template that's there. There's a document that tells you what the allowable costs are so that you can just, be paying attention to that and make sure that you're not listing anything as an expense that is not an allowable expense. So just paying attention to all of that. I do see a question in the chat. Thank you so much for bringing that up. In terms of the application and word limits or character limits, yes, there are word limits for the sections. And what I would strongly encourage you to do, again, we'll show you in a moment. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at the Rocket Resource Hub, there is actually a Google document that you can make a copy of and start to, type in your responses. And that will list the word limits there. It's also in the application workbook as well. So well in advance how many words you are limited to. I know that is tough because we want to tell all the things, but you want to make sure again that you're aligning it back to that priority area and really talking specifically about what it is that your program does. All right. Any other questions before we move on to the rubric for the application? All right. I'm going to pass it to Dana.
Thanks, Dana. I could not love that more. Okay. So before we move into some questions and answers and what Dana was talking about, what does the support look like from here? How do we move forward from here? How do we start writing tomorrow and start thinking tomorrow? We're going to just take a look at using the rubric as a tool. So the rubric is the evaluation system or metric system that's going to allow the folks who are reviewing your applications to score them. And so as you'll see from this rubric, I'm going to share it on my screen and and Hannah just popped it into the chat as well. So thank you so much for that, Hannah. And yes, Julie will send the PowerPoint to all of you as well. So you'll have that as a resource. And there'll also be a recording of today that goes up on the website. So we're going to look quickly at what using the rubric as a tool looks like, because it's not just something for the evaluators to use. It's something for us to keep in mind as we're writing, as we're thinking, and as we're clarifying each piece of the section of the application itself. You'll notice in the rubric that the language, the wording of what is being scored is not about how we're communicating it, but the what, the content, and that's really intentional. So let's take a look together. This, Hannah popped this direct link into the chat for you, but it's also linking back to what Dana said earlier. It's also in that Padlet, the Rocket Resource Hub, along with so many other pieces of information, and we'll explore that in just a couple of slides, so you know that you have that as a resource. So you can see here within the rubric that it connects a question and an evaluation system from 1 to 5 to each application question, and then the measure of what is going to be measured through that specific evaluation. So a really good way to use this rubric as you're writing and use it as a really interactive tool is to look at the column that has the highest score, which would be the 5, as you move through, and kind of use it as like a self-check system, and to say, did I score a 5 here? Not only as a self-check system, but to also then, after you have a pretty solid draft in place, to share it with folks who haven't seen this application, to share it with folks who know either nothing or very little about your organization, so that they can also see, did we really hit the mark here? Did we provide the information that was being asked? And did we kind of critically address the different pieces that were being asked to be addressed? So looking at these, as we're and kind of connecting back to what Dana shared about the application sections, here we are first, of course, with the priority areas and outcomes, right, that demonstrate impact. So we really want to be aiming for, as we're writing, number 5. The work shows how the selected priority area and outcomes will be highly impactful. So we're not just talking about alignment, but then we're also talking about what does the alignment with said priority area, how does it equal impact? So it's kind of a multi-step process too in our brain to start to connect these puzzle pieces. So again, we want to use this especially this number 5 column as a tool to help us get there. Similarly, when we're talking about measuring success, and we're talking about the clear picture of how success will be measured, how are we going to use the data collected to demonstrate the degree to which the selected outcome is met? We want to make sure, again, that we're communicating, looking at the language here in number 5, that the evaluation plan is comprehensive, right? We're showing the big picture and the specifics for measuring how and if the outcomes were reached, and giving detail about all parts of the process to get there. So you can kind of start to see this connective or reflective piece as we're moving back and forth in between what the application question is, what the rubric is asking us, or what the rubric is prompting the evaluators to think about in alignment with BCYF investment priorities, and then how that would show up in our application, which again is in this 5 column. We really want to, make sure that we're hitting on that. And so jumping back to scope of work, which Dana talked about a little bit earlier, we really want to make sure, again, here's the 5 column, project activities, participants, and the timeline are aligning thoroughly with the project description and its outcomes. Yeah. You'll also see, as we kind of start to move down a little bit farther in the rubric, we have things that show us multiple different pieces as we move through. So an and instead of an or, right? So here we have the project outcomes and the activities are aligning with the organization's vision, mission, and values, so that we're seeing everything as connected, so that the work And this takes us back to the metric all the way on the left-hand side, right? We're seeing how all of these things start to connect, how the work starts to connect with the relationship to the organization's vision, mission, and values. So again, using that column 5, and that the budget as well is specific, that it's aligned with the organization, how they're planning to use the funds, how you all are planning to use the funds. The line items are really specific and communicated so that we know it's not an estimate, it's a reality, and are in alignment, of course, with the project goals. So as you start to think about avenues of support from here, as you start to think about this application process itself, we really want to be using this document as a tool to help clarify, especially within the word limits and the character limits, what the community grant reviewers are going to be looking for. And we want to already set them up so that we're going to score a 5 in each category. And again, knowing that you're not alone in that. We're going to be working with you to get you to that spot. I'll pause here for any questions on the rubric before we move on. Warren, if you are talking, you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the rubric is part of the actual application that we need to fill out and send in as part of it.
No. The rubric is the tool that the reviewers, the community grant panel of reviewers, is going to be using to evaluate your application. So it's something we want to kind of keep in the back of our brain and use it as this tool as we're writing and drafting and thinking and talking. So that way we're addressing the pieces of the rubric. So essentially it makes their job really easy to say, yes, 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 yes. So we don't want to ignore what the rubric is asking, but it's not like an application question. We don't have to fill that out.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that clarification. That was great.
Question. Can a partnership apply?
I believe, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, that no partnerships are eligible for application at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. All right, everyone, our time is flying. We're gonna push through. Here we go. All right, so here's where Dana's gonna chat a little bit about how you're not alone in this journey and how we can't wait to work with you.
Yay. We are so excited. So I am personally excited because there are so many different levels of support and different ways that you can be supported. And we're starting so early. Dana said start writing tomorrow. I'm going to say start writing today. So we want to kind of go over and give you some more details around all of the different ways that BCYF is going to provide support during this pre-application process. So one of those things that you've heard us mention now many times is the Rocket Resource Hub. And so this is a Padlet. If you're not familiar with Padlet, sort of think of it as an electronic portfolio that is going to have a ton of resources, really anything that you needed connected to the application. It will have links to register for some of the webinars, and the launch pads that we'll talk about in a moment are all going to be there. Any requirements in terms of the application, the budget template that I mentioned, knowing what funds or funds are allowable, expenses are allowable, will live there as well. The application workbook is there that we've mentioned that has FAQs in it. Where do I apply? When do I apply? Just really kind of thinking through any questions that you may have connected to this application process is going to be there. A couple of things I want to highlight specifically about the Rocket Resource Hub. There are A lot of the resources that are available, specifically, definitely the Grassroots Fund, application workbook, and some other documents that are available in Spanish. So that again will be on that hub. There is also a section on there for frequently asked questions. So even after today, if you get off and you say, "Oh man, I forgot to ask this," then you have the ability on that Rocket Resource Hub again it's a plus sign. You just click on the plus sign, and your question will be emailed to BCYF, and then they will post the question and potentially the response as well. So all of that is going to be on the Rocket Resource Hub. So again, if you have not been able to check that out, definitely encourage you to do that. The other part of this pre-application technical assistance is also being able to work directly with the consultants that have been brought on board. So of course, Dana and I, and there are 4 other amazing consultants that will be a part of this work that will be here to support you. So we have our webinars, which are virtual. We've mentioned some of them. We'll show you in the next slide in a moment. Again, just reminding you about those dates and times and the topics for each of them. We also have launch pads. So these will be in-person opportunities. They will take place at the Impact Hub for you to, again, meet with the technical assistance providers. Some of them are going to be offered in the evening. There's one that happens on a weekend, on a Saturday, and then one in the afternoon. So really trying to think through. BCYF has done an amazing job to just make sure, again, that you are supported. These launch pads are 4 hours long, but don't worry, you do not have to be there for 4 hours. Again, you go to that Rocket Resource Hub and sign up for an hour to work with one of the providers, depending on what type of support you need will sort of dictate who you may be working with. The launch pads are also really going to be a great opportunity for you to network with other organizations, right? And collaborate and learn about all of the great work that is happening in terms of the youth in Baltimore City. So definitely encourage you to come to one or all of the launch pads. Again, Dana mentioned this in the beginning. The purpose of our technical assistance is really to provide you with targeted support, right? So it's not just, as was expressed in the grant panel, about receiving the grant, but BCYF really has a strong focus on building capacity of their grantees and really their applicants. So definitely, take advantage of the launch pad. And then we also have one-on-one opportunities, both in person. Again, the in-person technical assistance one-on-one will be at the Impact Hub. And I'm sorry, I said the launch pads are at the Impact Hub. That is incorrect. We'll tell you all the locations. They're different locations each time. But the in-person one-on-one sessions will be at the Impact Hub and then also electronically. Really excited to be able to add hours, the amount of hours that can be delivered in terms of the technical assistance this year. So again, we're hoping that you all will take advantage of that. And then if it so happens, we'll be sharing a link to being able to sign up for the one-on-one support. And that is, of course, where you would sign up for a scheduled time to work one-on-one with one of the technical assistance providers. If you find that none of those times work, then we do have a request form where you can get some asynchronous support. And so what that may look like is you sending or sharing your application with one of the technical assistance providers, and then being able to give you feedback, again, on your sort of own schedule if you're not able to meet any of the providers during the availability that they have. But the good news is that, again, there's 6 of us, and we have lots of availability between the 6 of us, both virtually and in person. So again, hopefully you all can take advantage of all of the different opportunities and options that we have for support. So let's get into some dates. on the next slide and when these launch pads and some of the webinars again that we mentioned are coming up. So the first opportunity is next Thursday. Super excited. We will be at the Patterson Park branch at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. This one is an evening session. So again, it will be from 4 to 8 p.m. Again, you can go to the Rocket Resource Hub and sign up for, the hour out of that 4 to 8 time slot that you'd like to meet one-on-one with a technical assistance provider. The next event that we'll be holding will be the webinar, which will take place on January 8th. Again, that will focus on the mission, vision, and values section of the application. So again, I would encourage you as you're looking through the application, and Dana just walked us through that rubric. If you know there are certain sections that you're going to need support with, maybe you say, I'm great on the mission, vision, and values, but the scope of work and outcomes, I need some support, right? You can kind of begin to think and hopefully make yourself available for these targeted webinars. The second launch pad that we're going to have is going to be on a Saturday. If a Saturday works better for you, that will be the second Saturday in January, the 11th, from 10 to 2 at the Cobalt workspace. So again, you can register for that through the Rocket Resource Hub. Next will be the budgeting and required documentation webinar. So that's where, again, we can really take a deeper dive into numbers and documentation and looking at the budget template and making sure that funds align to what it is that you say that you're doing and your programming and all of that. So that's Thursday, January 23rd. From 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And the last and final launch pad takes place on a Monday, again, giving you some afternoon availability from 1 to 5 p.m. That will be at Baltimore Unity Hall. And then the final sort of big group technical assistance event will be the scope of work and outcomes webinar, which is the 30th of January from 6 to 8. Any questions on we're going to the questions slide, but any questions about this, or I guess we could open it up to any general questions at this time as well.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. I'm just looking at the chat as well. Make sure we didn't miss anything.
I couldn't write as fast as y'all were talking. So y'all gonna send us y'all gonna email all this information to us?
So we will be emailing two things. We will email the slide deck that we shared today, and we will also email the recording. Through each of those, you will also have access to the Rocket Resource Hub. Okay. And Hannah, if you want to just drop the link to that, if you're able to, for anybody who may have missed it. The first time around. I know there's lots of things going on in the chat, so we can put it there. And I would encourage everyone to click on that and then bookmark it, because that is going to be your friend for the next 2.5 months as you're going through this process. Anytime you're like, where was that? What is this? When is that? You can go right there, and most every answer will be available to you. So I would definitely click on that, and like I said, bookmark it, save it, so that you have that.
Just one follow-up. So the recording and the slides will not be emailed. They'll be posted onto the website. What will be emailed after this session is we'll send an email thanking you all for attending, and then we'll also send the registration links and information for each session that is coming up after today, as well as some other resources. So you'll get that in an email.
Okay. Question number 2. So if you are funded for the Baltimore City Youth Fund summer program, and let's say in the same year you receive funding for this program, how does that kind of, does one cancel out the other?
So I'll chime in really. Are you talking about the Summer Funding Collaborative?
Yes.
So that is, while it's BCYF funds, we actually grant those funds to Baltimore's Promise. So that is not a BCYF grant. That is done through Baltimore's Promise. That is Summer Funding Collaborative. We do not oversee that at all. That is not run by us. So that has no weight into it doesn't interfere with your ability to apply to a BCYF grant, such as the Grassroots Fund or Community Accountable Fund. If you are currently an actual BCYF grantee, then you are not eligible unless your grant is ending August 31st of 2025. But I don't see anyone on this call that is a current grantee. So that shouldn't be a barrier for anybody. But summer funding and BCYF, well, BCYF funds are different things.
Thanks, Hannah.
And this is a 3-year grant, right?
It depends. The Community Accountable Fund is a 3-year grant, $75,000 each year. The Grassroots Fund is a 5-year grant at $50,000 each year. So it depends on which one of those programs.
Now, for let's say the 5-year program. Okay, so if the 5-year program, the time of the use of the grant, rather than get a summer program like through Baltimore Promise, we could utilize it for a whole 10-week summer session for 5 years.
Yeah, the funding is for each year. So it would have to support the programming each year moving forward. You would get the funding dispersed annually, potentially in increments, but it would support the programming each year. And to reiterate what Hannah was saying, it does not intersect or affect or impact at all if you're already doing that summer program. It's separate from.
Okay. Last question. I don't want to dominate. Having been granted the summer camp program last year for last, whatever. As an organization, we were required to actually take on 25% of the grant that would be reimbursed to us after the summer camp program. So what about, because it's still Baltimore City Youth Fund we're talking about, right?
That the program specifically for summer camp does not impact this process at all.
Okay, I know. That's not the question.
Yeah.
The question is, we grassroots organizations have to put up a certain amount of money if you are granted the summer program. For this program, will organization have to put up any monies?
There's no match requirement, no.
Thank you. Okay.
That's correct, right, Hannah?
Yes, that's correct. This is a disbursement grant, so it's not a reimbursable grant. When Dana and Dana were speaking about the annual award for each grant, so for a Grassroots Fund, $50,000, we do break the disbursements into 2 parts. So one will be given at the beginning of your grant year. The second disbursement will be given at the middle of your grant year, so around the March timeframe. And of course, pending that you are up to date and in compliance with all reporting requirements. So
Yes.
If you're late, then there may be delays, but it's not a reimbursable grant. So we are giving you the money and then you submit expense reports to show us how that money was spent.
Thank you.
And just to add to that as well, in the application workbook, there's actually a chart that provides the disbursement dates for you. So depending on when your documentation is approved and submitted and all of that, then it'll also tell you around about the date when you could expect a disbursement, just so you know for your own planning.
Thank you.
Thanks all. All right, Olivia, you're up.
Thank you, and thanks for everything. This was super helpful. I had 2 questions. The first one was, are there any limitations to, or I guess qualifications for who can nominate you for the, sorry, I'm forgetting the name now.
For the Community Accountable Fund.
Yeah.
No, anyone can nominate.
Okay, anyone in Baltimore City.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then the second question, so for the organizational budget requirements for both funds, like the $350K and then the $500K for the Community Accountable Fund. So I'm sorry if this is a repeat question, but is that based on the 2023 fiscal year And then I guess my my add-on question is, what happens, let's say, because it's a grant that's dispersed over 3 to 5 years, if your organizational budget goes up and goes beyond the 350K sometime within those 3 to 5 years, does that automatically exclude you, or I guess interrupt the grant from BCYF, if that makes sense as a question?
Yeah, so the eligibility in terms of the budget and for which fund is going to be at the time of the initial application. Everything else, if the budget grows, or we're hoping the organization grows, right? Like these funds to support capacity for the organization, we're really hopeful that does happen. But the aside from the required reporting and check-in points that BCYF already has in place, there won't be, kind of like a reassessment of, have you budgeted yourself out of this program? It's at the time of initial application. And to Devin's question in the chat as well, you can't receive the Community Accountable Fund grant and the Grassroots Fund at the same time. You can only get one or the other based on where your organization currently is. The documentation for budgeting is, correct me, Hannah, if I'm wrong, I believe it's based on your most recently completed fiscal year or calendar year, not your projected budget for the upcoming fiscal year and calendar year, correct?
So it is, we ask for last year's budget, current year, and next year's.
So if they're looking at, do I fit into Grassroots or Community Accountable, which of those 3 years will determine where they fall?
I would say if you have overlap between the two funds, reach out and we'll figure it out. But most organizations very clearly fit in one or the other. So if you don't, reach out and we'll figure out which you would apply to.
Thanks, Hannah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. All right, everyone.
One last question.
You
do you need it's open to nonprofits and for-profits?
It's only nonprofit organizations or an organization that is fiscally sponsored. So it's not open to for-profit organizations.
And do you need to have an audit?
No, an audit is not a requirement. Or Hannah?
It's only a requirement if your budget is 300,000 or more.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, everyone. We are coming to the end. So Hannah also just popped into the chat an evaluation form. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute or two to complete that evaluation form based on your experience today, it helps us to continue to reflect and refine so that we can support you in the best way possible. So please take a moment to do that. And know that, again, as if you've taken one thing from today, it is let's get started working, and let's get started working together. So here's a really nice and clear bullet point list for you to move forward with at a time that feels right for you, better now than later. So start to explore the materials and resources. As Dana said, that Rocket Resource Hub is your new best friend, and you can spend so much time there. Note the deadlines and plan a course of advance action. We don't want to be working on February 14th to get that application in by 5 p.m. We just don't even want to go there. So let's work to have it in advance. Let's work in advance of the deadlines so that we can maximize the support throughout the process. Connect with your team, connect with additional stakeholders, connect with additional folks that you're working with all the time for their thoughts, for their feedback. The application's going to be stronger if we can move it out of a silo and move it into some collective and collaborative thinking. And finally, connect with us. It is not an understatement to say we are so excited to work with you and are already so grateful for the amazing work of your organizations. And we want to help highlight that through this application process so that not only you can be set up to receive BCYF funds potentially, but so that you can also feel set up to look at other avenues of financial support and deepen those skills in that capacity. So we're really, really looking forward to that. We're here. There'll be a follow-up email, so you'll have all of those links about how to continue to engage with us. And in the meantime, we're also always available by email. So please, we're just an email away. Anything final in our last moments, Dana or Hannah?
Just excited to work with everybody. Thank you all for being here and looking forward to meeting all of you at the Launchpad or one-on-one. But thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.
Thank
Thanks for your
you.
time today. Please complete the evaluation form when you can, and have a great day.
Done.
We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.